Yeah, my name is Chuck Tampio, and I first want to say it's great to see all these faces live. No masks tonight. We've all had our shots. It's just great to see you all. And I saw a lot of people here with new member tags on. How many new members do we have? You raise your hands. Oh, welcome. I want to give you guys a special welcome. And if you just give me a moment indulgence, Myron, I want to say that those of you who know me know that I'm an East Coast kind of guy. And when I came out to Tucson, I made it a mission to try to understand Western art and cowboy art. And it came slowly, but it came, and I learned to appreciate and to understand it and appreciate it. And a lot of what I've learned about Western art, I've learned right here in this room with the wonderful speakers that we've had over the years that have been provided for us by Beth Fulver, who is now retiring, taking a well-needed rest after 13 years of providing us speakers. So Beth, thank you so much for all you've done. There's a woman who's really made a difference. And now I want to introduce our speaker, Myron Sahlberg. He's a man who's had 3 careers. Although he started, as soon as he picked up a pencil and a paper, he knew he was going to be an artist. So after serving in the Navy during the Vietnam years, he became an illustrator and a teacher and a portrait painter and a fine artist. And we're lucky to have him tonight. And he said once, every day that I can paint is a good day. So please welcome Myron Sahlberg.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to come. I read a little bit about what you folks do, and I surely appreciate, especially the educational part, if you're getting younger artists into the Western art and promoting the museums. As a kid, I just wished I would have had someone like you helping me understand art and understand how to get where I needed to go. I was telling someone at dinner today that the first original piece of art I ever saw, I was 17 years old. It was at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. I grew up in northwest Minnesota, about as rural as you can get in Minnesota. And there just wasn't that type of opportunity up there. And to go from northwestern Minnesota to Minneapolis to see art was just not going to happen in my situation. But I'll just give you a quick part of my story here and where I come from. I should just introduce my wife to you, Ellen, right here. She's originally from Canada. We met up in Canada. We have 3 married children. We have 8 grandchildren. And this is our 50th year anniversary. We live in Alexandria, Minnesota, which is kind of the heart, central Minnesota, about halfway between Fargo and Minneapolis. It's a lake country. We live on Lake Victoria. Are there any Minnesotans here tonight? We arrived in Tucson today about noon. We've been traveling 2.5 days. We started about 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning. We got about an hour west of Alexandria, and the sun wasn't quite up yet. And out from the side of the road came a big buck, and we hit it square. And your response there was kind of my response, and no one's response. Now what do we do? I mean, it was just like, what in the world? But there were people going to work, and it didn't take long. Sheriff came out there, and he was really understanding about what our situation was, and he got a tow truck out pretty quickly, and we had the car towed back to Alexandria, an hour back, and then we switched cars and hopped in the car and went back out on the road. So Tuesday we didn't get into our motel till 11:30 because I didn't want to lose that whole day there. We just couldn't afford to do it. So we're safe and sound, and we're feeling pretty good right now. I need to honor my second grade teacher, Miss Gladys Nelson. It was Miss Gladys Nelson that said to me in the second grade in February of that year, "You're an artist." She gave the students an opportunity to write about President Washington or Lincoln or draw a picture. So I drew a picture of George Washington. My mother took a picture out of a frame, put my drawing into the frame, and I took it to school the next day. And Miss Nelson said, "You're an artist." And in that small town school, there was one hallway for grades 1 through 6. So grades 1 through 6, whenever Miss Nelson saw me in the hall, she would say, "I have something for you." And she would tear things out of the magazines and give them to me. And the last time I saw her, just before she passed away, was just a year out of high school. But it was her that put a name to what I felt in my heart. You know, you're an artist, and I knew that. And so there was never a question in my mind what I was going to be. I just didn't know how I was going to get there. After high school, I went to Canada for 1 year Bible college where I met my wife. That changed my life. We weren't married till 4 years later. It was during the Vietnam War, and so after that year of school, the draft was coming down on me. So my dad took me for a long walk, and he said, "I don't want you to be a foot soldier." He said, I just want you to do something else." He was in World War II. And so I joined the Navy. And since my dad was an auto body man, and I grew up in an auto body shop, they said, "You're going to be kind of like an auto body guy, but you're going to work on aircraft." So I was a metalsmith for Phantom jets, partly in San Diego during my time there, and then partly in Vietnam on an aircraft carrier. During those years, I thought a lot about being an artist, but I still didn't know how I was going to get there. And finally, when Ellen and I were married, just a few months before I got out of the service, I did some research and found out that there was a school in Kansas University, that had an illustration program. I remember that when I was about 16, I was looking at a magazine cover that was illustrated, and it was illustrated by an artist named John Howard Sandon, who was from Minnesota. And I said, "I want to do that. That's what I want to be, as an illustrator." So went to school, graduated from Kansas University, and later graduated from the University of St. Thomas with a master's degree. And but after graduating from the University of Kansas, I began working as an illustrator in Kansas for the University of Kansas. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 4 sets of slides. Some of you may know what an illustrator does, some of you may not, but I discovered that working in illustration was advantageous for my coming into Western art scene. So this is a presentation I have given to high school students to encourage them in the area of illustration. Illustration is really all involved with words and pictures. An illustrator has to read an article, text that an art director gives them or her, and then interpret that into illustrations. These aren't my illustrations, they're just a variety of illustrations I pulled out. The job of a graphic designer is a person who designs words and type, and then uses photographs or illustrations to support those words. The job of an illustrator is to translate those words or stories into pictures or illustrations. An illustrator's job is to creatively solve visual problems. So you're thinking in terms of pictures when it comes to words. You're working sometimes with other people's ideas. Well, all I'm trying to say here is that an illustrator often is criticized by fine artists as being too confined. But it's not actually confining, it's just simply how the job works. You work with money, with budgets, so if you're not going to get paid a lot for the piece, you might not be able to spend the time that you'd like to spend. You work with deadlines, and that means you get your work in on time. And I found out that coming into this Western art world, that was one of the pluses about my background. Here's an example of one piece that area of work that I did. I've worked in about 24 different magazines. If you take just one of these magazines, I created an average of 4 illustrations per year for 17 years for a particular magazine. This magazine has a circulation of about 350,000. And that adds up to over 23 million copies of my work in one magazine, all over the world, in this case. Most illustration ideas start with a photographic reference and a drawing. So these aren't my drawings. Again, they're just a number of illustrators' drawings. Whether it's building a car or illustrating a book or fashions or any kind of product, usually starts with a drawing. Here's a simple example that I did. This is the photograph that I took outside of an apartment of 2 girls that were roommates of my daughter. This is the drawing that I did, and this is the illustration that I did in watercolor. So the next samples are just samples of my work. I put together 5 books of my illustrations for my children. They weren't meant for public use, but I took these out of there. I did a number of illustrations for a lot of work for sports. This is it's kind of a mixed media piece with colored pencil and oil paint. This was on a football cover, University of Minnesota, and then they made it into a print. Bronco Nagurski is one of Minnesota's most famous football players. It's another sample of that where they gave the original art to his son. He wasn't able to make it to the game. So this is Minnesota again, baseball and football, hockey, and this is an example of a drawing that I did prior to doing the watercolor illustration. This particular, what ended up to be a poster, was in this movie, The Mighty Ducks. This is another piece for Minnesota hockey. I won't explain everything, but this is a series of collector cards that they gave away at games. Basketball, Iowa, football for their 100th anniversary, and then a wrestling poster. This is a drawing for a 100th anniversary football poster for University of North Dakota, or North Dakota State University. This is the painting. I think there are 104 portraits in there. watercolor. This one was done about the time Dances with Wolves came out. So they're called the Bison football team. So I looked at Dances with Wolves several times to see these bison coming across the football field. Isn't that what they were on? Lou Holtz, when he was the coach for Minnesota. This is some magazine illustration. Here's the drawing on the right, and then the painting, and then the context. So, the illustration is one thing, but you're always working with words. So in this case, the art director said you can design the space for the words. So that's why the illustration looks like that, because I designed the words to fit there. This is my son who modeled for me for this piece. My son modeled for both those pieces there, both those guys. I'd often have to pay him $5 to run across the yard. Are we done? Are we done yet? This is our daughter. She actually loved modeling for me. She really got into the stories and would really feel what she was modeling for. And I used a lot of friends. This couple they were friends of ours. That's my daughter again. That's the illustration, and that's the context for the illustration. That was for Frontier Airline magazine. C.S. Lewis. I illustrated him a couple of different times. So the illustration and then the context in the magazine. So it's for a magazine called In Fisherman Magazine. Illustration, context. This is the one on the right is pen and ink. I just call it scribble style, just a continuous line, and the one on the left is a watercolor. This is watercolor. Another C.S. Lewis piece. It was put in a book and then made into a poster. A friend of mine wrote the story, and then I did the illustrations. It was all done for a particular publisher. We did a series, I think, of about 5 or 6 of these. They were actually designed for young boys to have role models. So the stories were to help young boys understand men in their context of life and how they made a difference. Another series of books for the same organization for boys, kind of like a Cub Scout, Boy Scout type of thing. That's my son modeling again for me there. And that's my son and his friend. Different publications. This fellow, Freddie Lund was his name. He was inducted into the Minnesota Hall of Fame, Aviation Hall of Fame. So I did the poster on the left, and then I did this cancellation stamp right here for the little community where he grew.